Hi everybody, it's great to be back here again. It's Friday, and let's get down to our Torah lesson. This week's portion, Parashat Balak, is basically about a prophet that arises amongst the nations. And right away I'd like to bring down a few sources regarding this prophet. His name is Bilam. And this prophet we know was hired to curse as an assassin, to do some kind of damage to the people of Israel, to curse the people of Israel. You could say, again, a hired assassin, whatever it was, but it didn't work. He wasn't able, although he tried in different directions to curse Israel, many different ways, places, whatever it was, it didn't come to pass. It's something interesting is that, number one, why is a person like Bilam blessed with prophecy? He's, again, as we see his personality, he's not the simple individual. We're going to make that very clear in a moment. And the question is, why does he have this blessing of prophecy for? Right away, the Midrash says, it's brought down in the sources that God did not want the nations of the world to say, if they had a prophet amongst them, they would have returned, they would have repented to Hashem, to God. And here, this is an example of when they have a prophet and they're still remaining again in their ways, although they had an opportunity to let that prophet lead them to enlightenment, whatever you want to say. But it didn't work that way. They're not enlightened, they didn't repent, they're still behaving in their old ways. In reality, we know prophecy is a huge discussion, it's a huge topic to discuss. But we know basically with the Rambam Maimonides, when he talks about prophecy, he describes an individual who is extremely righteous in every way, a person who's almost like an angel on earth, and his behavior is so pure, and he's full of holiness. And only a person like that, maybe he'll merit in prophecy. Of course, it depends on God choosing you as well. But you have to do all the proper preparations. It doesn't something that comes so easy. So this seems, in a way, it seems to conflict. Here, Bilam, this evil person, who's willing to go curse the apple of God's eye, the people of Israel. And again, he's not the greatest person in the world, personality-wise, and he merits in prophecy. This, of course, we can take off in many different directions. Number one, we see in the world there are people who have kochot, as we say in Hebrew, people who have power. They can, in certain ways, predict the future, in certain ways do certain things. All kinds of supernatural things can be done, and these do exist. People have powers. But again, it doesn't make a person a holy man if he has those powers. And therefore, we can understand in a way, saying, okay, Bilam was a prophet in this light, that he had some kochot. God gave him these natural things that are almost like in his makeup, a way of seeing things, a way of, on one hand, having prophetic powers. But of course, it came, again, as we said before, God had a reason behind it, but of course, since his personality was very, very bad, and he was an evil person, it all came, his energy was drawn from, again, kochot tuma, from the uncleanliness powers in the world, that exist in the world. And that's something that we're going to develop a little bit more now and try to understand a little bit and relate it to some things that are happening now. If we look in this week's portion, there's a very, very detailed discussion of Bilam on his donkey, how he travels with his donkey. And the Torah describes it. I'd like to read some of these verses because it's very long and lengthy, and it's something I find very, very interesting, how the Torah goes out of its way to describe this whole, how do we say, what do you want to say, this whole ride with his donkey. And let's read the verses. If we look, where does it begin here? Okay, let's start over here. If you go to chapter 22, let's all go together, open your Torahs up to chapter 22, verse number 21. It says like this, Vayakom Bilam baboker. And Bilam gets up in the morning. Vayachavoshet atono. And he saddles up his donkey. It's very interesting. This, of course, brings us right away in the Torah, in Genesis, where Abraham gets up early in the morning and he saddles up his donkey. So the only difference is Abraham is riding a chamor, which is a male donkey, and Bilam is riding a female donkey, which we're going to get to that in a moment. Vayelech im sarei Moav, and he goes with the ministers of Moab. Vayichar af halokim ki holechu, and God gets angry because he goes with them. Vayityatzei malach Hashem b'derech lesatano, and an angel appears along the path in order to prevent him, or to sort of, in the word in Hebrew is satan, to be sort of like literally, it's translated like a devil. But it means, satan means to be it's the word, a hindrance to Bilam, who's of course on his way, he wants to curse Israel. And he's riding on his donkey with two servants with him. And the donkey is able to see an angel of God. Standing in the way, right? And the angel has this sword, it's in his hand. So the donkey runs to the side, goes to the field, he leaves the path. So Bilam immediately responds by trying to he whips his donkey and tries to get him to go in the right way. So the angel stands in the middle of the path. There's two fences on both sides. So again, the donkey sees now the angel, and it pushes over to one of the walls, and Bilam's foot gets crushed a little bit in the wall. He hits the donkey again. So the malach goes further, and it stands in a place, a very narrow place where it can't go anymore, right or left. So again, the donkey sees the angel of Hashem, and it starts to tilbatz, which means it's jumping up and down in its place. And Bilam gets very, very angry because the donkey's not moving, he's standing still, he's jumping up and down, and he hits again the donkey again. So what happens then? And then God opens up the mouth of the donkey. So he says to him, what did you do to me? Why is the donkey's talking to Bilam? He's saying, why did you hit me 3 times for? He goes, because so Bilam right away answers him, look what you did to me. You're not listening to me, you're abusing me, and therefore if I had something in my hand, I would kill you. He says to him, if he had a sword in his hand. And he says, I am your donkey that you've been riding on for forever, from time immemorial, he's saying. Did I ever do something like this to you before? I was not used to doing things like this. And he says, no. And then, of course, the story goes on, and God opens up the eyes of Bilam. This long story about the description in the Torah is not for naught. There's a reason that God is, in the Torah here, is giving, of course, prophecy over to Moshe Rabbeinu, brings down the details about this particular thing. It's very interesting, and now we're going to try to go in a little bit more detail over here. If you look, we're going to bring down a Talmudic passage, and the Talmudic section talks about this particular, again, part of the Torah. And it says like this. Right? So the donkey says to Bilam, I am your donkey. So what does Bilam answer? The Talmud fills in the missing words that he's saying in this conversation. The Talmud says, well, what do you mean you're my donkey? I use you for putting on heavy loads. The tina ba'alma, the Gemara says. So the donkey says right away, no, asher rachavta, you were riding on me. So he says, no, only akrai ba'alma, once in a while. So the donkey answers, that's not true, not once in a while. Me'odcha dayom hazeh. Since, forever, he's saying, since you've been, since you got a hold of me, since you got me, you've been riding on me. And more than that, he's saying that I actually do your sexual needs at night. Meaning, Maseh Yishud refers to having relations, bestiality, with his donkey at night. That's what the Talmud is saying. And how does the Talmud learn it out? It compares it to the word haskeh hiskanti. Again, in English you can't see how that was learned out, but in the Talmud it brings the 2 Hebrew words, and it brings down, in relating King David, when he was given Avishaga Shunamit, as someone, and when he got old and he was cold, he had her sit in to warm him up, and the word haskeh hiskant is the same words used to warm, so the Talmud is hinting to something that took place between Bil'am and his donkey, and we call it, in a modern word, of bestiality, which is something absolutely mind-boggling. Talmud is saying, in other words, that Bil'am was stepped so low that he's having sexual relations with his donkey. Wow. What does this all mean? How to relate to this? This even makes things even harder. We're saying that Bil'am was merited in prophecy, and he was able to see things. On the other hand, we see how low he stepped down as far as his morality, that he was having relations with this animal. And I want to somehow connect this to what's going on today. This is a very, very controversial topic that I'm going to bring up now, but it's something we should mention a little bit about it, and I'm sure in the future maybe we will talk more about it. And this is called the Supreme Court of the United States, like other 21 other countries, 23 other countries in the world, have legalized marriage of homosexuals. And the question is, where does that stand in morality? How does the Torah relate to homosexuality? Just like in bestiality, or just like other sexual offenses, the Torah obviously relates to each of these offenses very, very clearly. In the Torah, if we look in the Leviticus, and I have actually brought it down over here, Leviticus 18. Look at Leviticus 18, let's start with verse number 21. Leviticus 18, verse number 21 says, you shall not allow your seed to give over to Molech as a kind of idol worship, when they would put the child to the fire. Because this will be, of course, lo techalel et shem Hashem, you will be disgracing God's name. In verse number 22 it says, V'tzachar lo tishkab mishkevei isha toivai. A man, and men are not allowed to commit homosexuality, which means sodomy, whatever it was, because it's an abomination to God. And then right after that it brings down, person cannot have relations or bestiality with animals, right? This is the third level. So we see the Torah goes down in different levels of sexual offenses. Number one, first idol worship, and then it goes on to talk about homosexuality, and then it goes on to talk about having relations with an animal. And then the Torah continues to say, Al titamu b'chol eili, you shall not make yourself unclean to all these acts, ki b'chol eile nitmeu hagoyim asher ani meshalech mipnechem. Because he's saying the nations that I'm throwing them out from the land of Israel, they committed these terrible atrocities, and therefore do not follow in their footsteps. And it says, because if it happens, God will remember this terrible sin, and He will vomit out those who are dwelling in the land for these terrible abominations. The Torah goes on. You should see actually the verses there. So here we see this sort of like, just, how do we say, wrapped up in the middle of the terrible offenses of this idol worship and bestiality. There's homosexuality behavior, which means acts, sexual intercourse of male. I'm trying to distinguish, because a person can have homosexual tendencies, or we call in Hebrew yitzarim, like desires, but he doesn't go ahead and do it because the Torah says you're not allowed to do it. Right? The Torah can't, some person cannot be held accountable for his inner desires. If a person has a certain tendency, we could say, okay, he can't control that tendency as far as what's in his heart, but he can prevent himself from doing the atrocity. The Torah says doing that atrocity, and there's a big difference. And therefore, the Torah is judges a person according to his actions, not according to his feelings. Because a person somehow can't control his feelings. He may have this particular attraction, which doesn't exist in most people, but he has it. So you can't deny that, but you can say, okay, he has that, but he can't go ahead and actually go through with the sexual offense, which the Torah defines as a sexual offense. Just like a person can have an attraction for eating milk and meat together, but the Torah says you can't do it, so you don't do it. Or eating pig, and you can't eat pig. Or any other thing. A person can have attraction to do something immoral, but the Torah says you're not allowed to do it. So we follow the Torah as our guidelines. It's our guidelines. It's our, what do I say, Shulchan Aruch, our code for following, for maintaining proper morality. Because what happens is, and we see from here, is that there's a loss of humanity in different time periods of the touch of what is moral and what is not moral. For example, tomorrow, someone come along and say, you know something? Bestiality is moral, and therefore I want to now legalize marriage between men and animals, something like that. Which is, it sounds so crazy, but who knows? If this keeps up in this society, the person wants to be married, he wants full rights for his animal that he wants to be married to. Again, these things seem ridiculous. Yes, just like in the old days, that same-sex marriages were also ridiculous, but now became something that society, through the pressure of society, that has become so involved in these offenses, have allowed for such things. And therefore, we don't know what's going to be in the future, but the Torah, we know, is eternal. So the Torah says this cannot be done. A person may have a crazy desire in his heart for something, but he has to control himself, right? Just like a person has, there are people that are violent, have violent desires or other crazy kind of desires within their hearts, but they have to learn to control and not act like animals, but act like human beings, and not allow their violence and their anger to take over, to all encompass themselves. And these kind of things is what the Torah gives us the proper boundaries. Taking this again, this concept, bringing it back to Bilam, we see that this prophet of the nations was a man who was so corrupt, and he actually stepped down to the lowest of the low of this bestiality, which he practiced with his donkey, and he was able to see. It brought down in the Zohar Kadosh that through the dark side, he brought him this vision, and he was able to see all kinds of things. He got a lot of power from this evilness within him. And here God is saying, it's brought down in the Midrash, I want to show you the difference. Look at Bilam. Look at how he has the middle of this whole thing of him going to curse Israel and using his power as a prophet. Right? He didn't use his sword. Here he got a fight with his donkey. He got angry and wanted to kill his donkey, and that was his desire. Which means that the Torah is really showing us that he was lower than the donkey itself. A donkey is a donkey. It's an animal. He actually was lower than this animal, and the Torah is trying to make that very clear, relating to this particular individual. But of course, the message is that here he represented this prophet of the nations going out to curse Israel. Of course, he wasn't successful, and he can't be successful cursing the people of Israel. But we see the lesson is a very powerful lesson that God's trying to teach us over here. Is that in reality, it's always the exception to the rule, what makes the rule so strong, is that when a person has to strive to be holy, to rectify himself, to work so hard, and that way he's going to achieve prophecy. But not like someone like Bilam, that it came to him through this terrible evil behavior and corruption, that he was so corrupt. And that, of course, will bring to disaster and bring tragedy. And only we see what happened at the end. We see Bilam's ending. And we see how he was successful in one way. He was able to work very hard in making the Jews sin, committing sexual sins. At the end of this week's portion, we see it talks about the sexual sins that he was involved in, causing a plague in Israel, that at least he said, I can't curse the people of Israel, but at least I can cause some of them to be killed in a plague because of bad behavior, unholy behavior. But anyway, this concept, I think, is so powerful to society today. Look what's going on in society. We've completely lost the values that we once had of what a real home is all about, how to build a house of holiness and purity in a home. People understanding, used to be a time, I remember when I was a kid, like couples living together was unheard of. I mean, I'm not that old, right? But anyway, couples living together before marriage or premarital sex, these things were considered not good things. And then, of course, that became an everyday thing. And slowly the family concept became destroyed because people can live together they don't want to have children. They don't want to have any commitment, so they just don't have children or whatever, children out of wedlock. There's nothing about a family anymore, just living and looking for pleasures in life. And then, of course, the homosexuality now, this whole issue now is becoming so big in society. Again, another complete downhill walk of society, where now the Supreme Court of the United States, of course, is giving into pressure again and permitting people to be married in this way. I'm not here to discuss, again, I mentioned before, how to deal with it in Judaism. How do we deal with homosexuals? These things are real, they exist, but there's a way of dealing with it and teaching about a person who has to not, again, we said it before, not break boundaries, Torah boundaries. The next thing we're going to see worse. They're just going to keep going down and down unless there's something that's going to stop society from this downhill, rolling downhill. And that has to come from purity, and it comes from connecting to Torah, it comes from study, and it comes from striving to really be a holy person in this world. If you think about it, all these things in society, these terrible calamities take place in society, come from one thing, and that's people looking for a personal enjoyment just for the sake of enjoyment. There's nothing wrong with people being happy, enjoying their lives, but with no boundaries. There's no limits to their fulfilling their personal pleasures, and not even looking at any. There's no more boundaries. There's nothing we can look to or relate to that can actually give us those guidelines. When can we enjoy ourselves? In what way? It's completely living a life of, as we say in Hebrew, hefker, complete blindness of life, a life where people do what they want, and a life like this corrupts society and causes terrible, terrible problems in society. This is why, again, there's so much violence in schools. This is why, if we look what's going on in the world is falling apart, and it seems, basically, because we lost the boundaries. We've lost our boundaries, and we're going downhill. And this is where the Torah can rectify it and really save humanity from this terrible, terrible fall. And that really, again, bringing it back to this week's portion, is represented by Bil'am, this prophet, this evil prophet, that we see was lower than his animal. And this is the source of all uncleanliness. God says, when he speaks to Bil'am, it says in Hebrew, Vayikar. There's an aleph missing, which means he just happens to talk to Bil'am. And the word in Hebrew, kar, comes from the word kuf reshir, meaning keri, an uncleanliness of semen. That's really the name of keri. On the other hand, Vayikar, God calls to Moshe Rabbeinu, a full calling, because Moshe Rabbeinu is a holy person and lives a life of holiness. And the number one rule of holiness, of course, is following boundaries and knowing what you can do, what you can't do in this world. But anyway, this is a long discussion. We will have to get back to it in the future. Shabbat Shalom, Besorot Tovot, Yeshuot V'Nechama. Bye-bye.